Residency Unlimited, and we are a nonprofit organization physically based in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. And we kind of support the exchange of art and ideas through residencies that are local, national, and international. And we also have year-round public programs, the majority of which are generated by the activities and practices of the artists who are in residence at any given time. So in March, when this all went down with COVID, we closed our doors and the international residents all returned home. We did continue to launch our 2 New York City-based residency programs, one of which is Food Futures, which is dedicated to looking at food resilience in urban environments, and also the 2020 NYC Artist Residency Program. We launched online, and I really have to thank the artists first and foremost for wanting to continue on this kind of surreal adventure. I don't know that anyone thought we would still be online now, but alas, here we are. And so we've had to modify everything as we went along. And I also want to quickly thank the Department of Cultural Affairs and the generous individual supporters who have made this program possible, all of the curators and critics and speakers who joined us online, and a huge shout out to Elisa Alexander, who is the New York City Residency Assistant and Communications Coordinator, who unfortunately cannot be here with us tonight. So I've said this, and I know that the New York City residents are probably tired of me saying this, but I do want to note that this experience and my foster cat, Bill, who may make an appearance, have been the highlights of my COVID experience. So I want to thank you for that, because it's been a real large part of the most meaningful engagement that I've had during this time. So I'd like to quickly introduce the artists. We have Carlos Rosales Silva. Do you want to just wave there? Or I don't know if Lulu is highlighting you. And Christopher Uremezue, Elizabeth Moran, and Xiang Wu. And they will all be making brief presentations of their work. And then each artist is going to pose a question to the group that's informed by our weekly sessions. We began with artist salons, and then I thought, of course, any day now we'd be back at Residency Unlimited. And then from there on, we kind of collectively started designing our weekly discussion groups. So we're going to begin with Carlos. We're going in alphabetical order by first name. I'm just going to read his bio, and then he's going to present on his work. Carlos Rosales Silva is from El Paso, Texas. His practice considers a deep history of making that spans complex visual communications of pre-colonial indigenous peoples to the intentional and functional color languages of small businesses and homeowners in predominantly brown neighborhoods. Formerly obsessive about color, texture, and shape, abstraction is Carlos's tool for navigating the tense states that brownness often finds itself in, states that both attempt to preserve cultural tradition and assimilate for survival purposes, states where home is experienced both in feeling and in moments of memory. Some recent exhibitions include the 2020 Spring Break Art Show and a solo exhibition at Sadie Haley Project in Minneapolis. In 2019, he founded the collaborative pedagogical and publishing project, MFA Brown Art. He received a BA in studio art from the University of Texas in Austin and graduated this June with an MFA in fine arts from the School of Visual Arts. Congratulations, Carlos! Woo! And with no further ado, please share your work with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carlos. Residency Unlimited has been such a wonderful experience. I agree wholeheartedly with Rachel. It's been a highlight. This is my studio work. I'm a sculptor and painter primarily, and I like to imagine a modernism and formalism that has not been touched by Euro-colonial violence. For me, this means citing a living art history that threads the works of indigenous artists, brown builders and craftspeople, and commercial and political muralists, and the works of my family who are all of these things. And I grew up along the border of Mexico and the United States in El Paso, Texas, and I work in the abstract in my studio. As a first-generation US citizen, I experienced Spanish being extracted from me and replaced with English. And 3 generations earlier, the Tiwa Pueblo language was extracted from my ancestors and replaced with Spanish. So because of this, I find the formal and the visual freeing, and abstraction is a really generative place to untether from verbal and textual communication. During the residency in the past few months, this practice has been scaled down a bit, but this has still been inactive in the form of studies and sketches and play. And much of my studio work has a foundation in drawing, study, collaging, and this has been a perfect opportunity to get back to basics. Scaling a practice has been really important for me in the last decade of being a working artist. I think it's important for anyone that continues to work for a lifetime. But in the last few months, I feel like everyone, including artists, experience a need to scale our work and our lives, not only for the pandemic, but for an urgent political moment. And so this urgency presented so many opportunities to engage creatively in ways that were completely untethered from like my typical presentation of work. And it's something that I really grew to like appreciate and love. And so something that, beyond the collaging and the studies and the abstract studio that became really important were painting signs for actions and for protests. And so, when we started going, it was like, a month and a half ago or so, like a good sign really invigorates, inspires, energizes. It's so direct and accessible, and, they're all paintings. So I found myself painting signs almost every day for all the actions I was attending. And this new painting practice intersected really perfectly and immediately with the secondary practice of publishing that I have. So publishing books and zines has also been really important. Whoa. Last week, I designed and published a kind of introduction to abolition zine. I offered it for free on my Instagram and on the Essex Flowers Gallery Instagram, and have since mailed out almost 100 copies of The Future Has No Cops. So this zine is a small collection of interviews and writing by Mariam Kaba and Alex Vital, along with some graphic work. And if you'd like a free copy mailed to you, please DM me, I'd be happy to do that. So publishing has become really important in the last year or so. Last summer, I published 4 books and zines: a book of photos and texts by Jada McGarrell, a collaborative book by Daniel Almeida and Max Julian, an intro to archiving zine by Martha Tenney and Zakiya Collier, and a collaborative book for an exhibition that I organized in Texas last fall. This practice is continuing this year and has been really exciting to kind of undertake during all of this. And so this year I am commissioning zines, like 4 new zines and books from Alison Kuo, Brooke Burnside, Mimi Bai, and Eric Zantaskol and Makilla. And those are forthcoming. There's no deadlines right now for anyone, so we're just kind of taking it as it comes. But it's such a great opportunity to, form these really rewarding community links to artists that I admire, that I want to work with. And it allows me to pay artists. It allows us to collaborate on an object that can be really easily distributed, archived, and preserved. I actually just finished using myself. It's called Salsita, and Salsita is a text about a family salsa recipe. It's about gentrification and Mexican repatriation. It'll be available soon in print and PDF. So that's what I've been working on currently, and I want to thank Rachel and Elisa from Residency Unlimited. It's been really wonderful, and everyone else at Residency Unlimited, and of course my fellow artists, Chris, Xiang, and Elizabeth, for the great exchanges. It's been so wonderful, but thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. It's crazy to think we haven't all met yet in real life. I think Lulu and Elizabeth met, and Lulu and I, of course, know each other, but that's it. Okay, so our next presenter is Christopher Uremezue, who is the founder of Raga NYC, a collective platform that connects a growing network of queer Caribbean artists and allies across disciplines through online storytelling and events. His penchant for interviews and storytelling have deeply informed his practice, with a focus on his Jamaican heritage and the complexities of desire for connection, personal mythologies, and the tragedies of public lynchings as primary source material. Christopher's concentration has recently expanded to recounting and visualizing the effects of his mother's immigration to the United States from Jamaica. He was born in Long Island, New York. His projects include Body, as part of the New Museum's Department of Education and Public Engagement's Research and Development season, which culminated in the exhibition Raga NYC, All the Threatened and Delicious Things Joining One Another. As a lead organizing member of the NYC-based collective House of La Dosha, he has exhibited in Trigger, Gender as a Tool and a Weapon at the New Museum, and in the Shed's inaugural open call for New York City-based emerging artists. He received a BFA in Fine Arts from Parsons School of Design in New York. Go for it, Chris. Our signature.
Hello, my name is Chris Uremezue, and I'm a resident at the Residency Unlimited residency for 2020. I have 5 minutes, so I'll keep this really short. In short, I, during the residency, walked through my bodies of work, from Tapa Tapa to Facing a Foggy Mirror. As you can see here, just a quick preview of some of my work. And then under the palm tree leaves, some more of my work. Up into my most recent work, which is titled Yard, which means home in Jamaica. And I'm going to be making work that looks a lot like this for the residency show happening this summer at a smaller scale. During the course of residency, I received a lot of encouragement to continue to work with my mom. This is just some previews of a performance I did with my mom at the end of last year. So during the residency, I've interviewed my mom, my grandmother, other members of my family, and I've shot some self-portraits, did some workshopping with resin to be smarter in terms of user of resin, as dangerous as it is, and also how to just make a better presentation of my website, encouragement on how to incorporate all the programmatic work I do with art collectives I've created, from Raga NYC to Connect JA to House of Doja. I won't get into what those are, but I can answer those in the Q&A coming up. And I will be making work that looks a lot like this for the end of this residency. And I think that is it in very, very short. Thanks.
I was so panicked. I was like, it has to be 5 minutes. Talk faster. So that was very rushed, but ask all the questions you'd like after. That's all. Thank you.
You're also more than welcome to add anything if you'd like.
Just that this has been great, and I thank you everyone involved with RU with all the help and clarity. I think that I walked into this year pretty excited, and COVID hit, and I was like, I don't know who I am. Why do I even make art? I'm leaving. And then all the meetings and talks and salons have reassured me, and I actually have a very clear idea of like what I want to do, how I'm doing it, better understanding of how I relate to my fine art work versus my programmatic work with the art collectives I've created and projects I've created, which has been a blur for many years of my life. All the kind of work I want to make, and there's even just like specific moments, like I remember Elizabeth saying, "Your work, it's okay if your work isn't healing. The healing is the doing, and you're doing all this other stuff." And I was like, so there's been a lot of moments during this residency, and yeah, it's been really great. And thank you to everybody, all the artists, and everyone for you.
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Miranda, who's also a Texan, born in Houston. Her research-based practice is informed by a preoccupation with the subjectivity of facts and the evidence of unknown or little understood histories that take form in photography, audio, text, and found objects. Elizabeth's multi-year project, Against the Best Possible Sources, examines the earliest history of the first professional fact-checkers, a role invented in 1922 by Time, then a fledgling magazine, and a role held exclusively by women until 1971. She has recently had solo exhibitions at Massimo Ligregi Gallery, Catania, Italy, Southern Methodist University's Hahn Gallery in Texas, a Black Crown Gallery in Oakland, and at Cucci Fritas Gallery and Project Space in New York City. She received an MFA in Fine Art and an MA in Visual and Critical Studies from California College of the Arts, and a BFA from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. You're on, Elizabeth.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I have a short video that's just going to play behind me while I read just a bit about my research. So I guess without further ado. As Rachel said, my practice is research-based, and what I work with is really anything that could be called a record. So generally speaking, I'm interested in what makes a piece of information a fact and how any document can become evidence of something to be believed or as presenting truth or reality. In 2016, I was particularly struck by the phrase post-fact era, and when that began circulating as a moniker for our time. And I began to wonder if we were entering some new era that is post-fact, quote, quote, then when did the era of facts, the era we were leaving, begin? So my mind went to fact checking, and I began to wonder, how did the process of checking facts begin, particularly when it comes to news and other forms of information dispersion. I began, of course, by reading up on just basic media history, and I reached out to scholars like Jill Lepore and Sarah Harrison Smith. And what I found was that it's common knowledge that Time magazine is credited for having invented the idea of fact-checking. Indeed, they almost named their magazine Facts Magazine. It was only at the last minute that they changed their magazine to be Time. And it's also common knowledge that all of the first fact-checkers were women. But everyone I reached out to and all the resources I read, no one could tell me any of their names. No one could tell me who was the first fact checker, who were these women who invented these processes. So for the last few years, I have been investigating that earliest history, as Rachel said. And up until it closed because of the pandemic, I had been spending a good chunk of my time in the Time corporate archive. Seeking to learn more about these women, their work, and how these processes that are still used by reputable news organizations today first came into existence. The scrolling images that I mentioned that you see scrolling through as I'm speaking are all photographs that I took with my cell phone from my visits to the archive. My phone is the only thing I can bring in with me, so as a result, I have been creating a sort of digitized version of every box and folder that I have touched. As I've been spending time going through the archives, I found both heartbreakingly, but also unsurprising, that there are very few first-person accounts of the women themselves that remain in the archive. These are primary sources that have been lost. Instead, the majority of their stories are told through the internal correspondences of their male colleagues, the early Time writers and editors, and those have been preserved in the archives, meaning that the only records of these women and their labor was seen, recorded, and mythologized through a sustained male gaze. Even the portraits of these women that you see go largely unnamed. My only source of information are the memos of these co-workers, and they scribbled notes, they recorded reminiscences, and they even had hand-drawn cartoons and songs that they would sing about the fact-checkers as mockery. So it's only through those things that I'm able to learn about these women. And it's these questionable records that were chosen to be preserved for posterity. So what I've come to realize is that through my work, I am essentially fact-checking the history of fact-checking. And I've been performing a sort of accidental performance by re-performing the fact-checkers' labor and embodying the processes invented by the women themselves. I'm working towards composing the most comprehensive account of the first fact-checkers to date. But in so doing, I have to use creative nonfiction strategies to create this new narrative that's entirely made up of the found text that does exist, these questionable sources. Everything that I am working with is lifted from the male colleagues' descriptions. When my video stops, you can see behind me, that's the script I'm working on, is what's taped up behind me in my studio here. And by me doing the retelling, I am hoping to equalize these stories using my own voice and editing, and both highlight the untrustworthiness of the available information about these women, but also present their story for the first time. So thanks. I don't know how many seconds is left on the video. I may have spoken faster than when I practice. But while it plays, I also want to echo what everyone else has said. Thank you so much to Rachel, Lisa, Lulu, and everybody at RU for organizing and supporting our residency, particularly at this time. Our salon also has been a really wonderful consistency and through line for me. In a lot of ways, it's kind of gotten me through. And thank you so much to my fellow residents, Carlos, Christopher, and Xiang. I appreciate y'all so much, and I've learned so much from our conversations. So thank y'all.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, Ambika. Glad you could join us. Okay, so we need to talk about y'all later, Elizabeth, right? Because this is a really good one in terms of like discussing non-binary language. So our next artist is Xiang Wu, and he is a Chinese artist who teaches at the School of Visual Arts. He's also a member of the Experiment on Art and Technology track at New Inc. at the New Museum. Drawing from contemporary technology, digital power structures, popular culture, and the dynamics between identity and community as the alienation of both body and spirit, his practice examines how the virtual world, data, and algorithms ubiquitously, micro-alienate and reconstruct human interaction. Xiang has had solo exhibitions at Nancy Margoli's gallery in New York and CO2 Gallery in Florence, Italy. He received an MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and a BFA from the Florence Academy of Fine Arts. Go for it, Xiang.
Hello, everyone. It's great to introduce. I have a video, pre-recorded video with my presentation, so I'll be mute, like the real me, but yeah, the video will play.
My art practice focuses on a new power of control that I have termed as post-internet microalienation, referring to contemporary technology, digital power structures, popular culture, the dynamics between identity and community, as well as the alienation of an individual's spirit and body. I draw on these themes to create works rooted in absurdist and carnivalesque techniques to propose a critique and celebrations of the hybrid and alienated culture. My artistic interests started with microalienation, which occurs on the global scale through political and economic oppression. My past multimedia works, The Story of the Pig and Carnival 2020, addressed these through Slaughtered Bodies and Killed Spirits, a world related to Orwell's 1984, and the critical examination of the social credit system, a Black Mirror reality. Other works refers to the invisible forces, such as algorithm-based commercials and data surveillance that disassemble an individual's value and irrationality in their everyday lives, or microalienation. In the project Smarter City 2, for example, I designed two kinds of interaction: interactive video installation through infrared sensors and augmented reality AR application to encourage participants to interact with the fictitious characters and symbols situated in the subway to explore how surveillance, data, and algorithm reconstruct and microalienates people. In my most recent project, A Woman with a Technology, I constructed a year-long examination of how specifically the internet algorithm personalize an individual's online experience and create the filter bubble, a situation in which an internet user encounters only information and opinions that conform to and reinforce their own beliefs. The project started from a recording of all my daily online experiences over a period of 3 months and create a big archive, which is a part 1 of the project. A series of imagery were then created through data analysis, such as the frequency changes of the keywords in the form of diagrams and spreadsheets, which is a part 2 of the project. Then, through image detection technology, a 3-channel video visually presents what information the internet algorithm sees and how the filter bubbles are interconnected. Finally, which is the part 4 of the project, I trained an AI chatbot using all the collected data. Through my conversation with a chatbot, whose knowledge equals all the information in the archive, it created a video script and I made an animated video based on this AI-generated script.
transition 都是 transition。
Thank you. And just to, really want to thank this opportunity, and to share, to know you guys, and it was what a wonderful experiences, and just feel very safe and helpful the past few weeks and months, and all the conversation we had. It was also very much informed the project I'm currently working on, which I will show as a part of the group show together. So very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiang.
Thank you.
This is a good time to ask everyone to please save the date or stay tuned. The culminating exhibition, which was originally scheduled to take place in June, is now happening at the end of summer at the Cuchifritos Gallery and Project Space in the Lower East Side. So we haven't announced the exact date yet, but it's looking like it will be the final week of August. So if you're not on our email list already, please sign up. And we're very much looking forward to it. So at this point, we're going to turn to questions from the artists. And so I think we'll start with Carlos, and then we'll just take it organically from there.
Question?
And yeah, it's question time.
Okay. I have so many questions, but
Yeah.
I have become obsessed with people's obsession with going out to eat right now.
Oh yeah.
It seems so wild, but have any of y'all been out to eat a meal in outdoor dining? Yeah.
I have once.
Yeah.
I just went this week for the first time.
Oh, I should do it. I'm also like really obsessed with the barriers that people have to build in the street. So everyone's is like a little different. And at the beginning of outdoor dining, there were no regulations. And so people were just building these like, whatever they could find to build, barriers in the street. But then the city all of a sudden came up with the regulation that it had to be 18 inches thick. So that's like an actual like standard now for inspectors, like city inspectors come around and measure the barriers. So now they're all kind of like uniformly 18 inches thick, which is really funny. But they're also different and so strange. And I've like started documenting them everywhere that I go because they're just like these weird objects. Where I live, I'm on 2nd Avenue and 51st Street in Midtown, which is like not really a neighborhood, but like 2nd Avenue is basically like a highway, and there are people eating in the middle of 2nd Avenue with like semi-trucks rushing by them, like carbon monoxide. It's like amazing. And there's even like people have made signs that say like slow down, there's like people eating here. And so I'm just like I've been riding my bike around all over the city, obviously, recently, and I've just become so like into these builds for these things, but I have yet to be out. But I'm curious, like where did you go? How did it feel?
I've actually gone a couple times. I had that same experience where I was like, oh, I'm gonna like go to this restaurant, and I'm like, oh, it's like, it's like the like
al fresco.
in Paris, but like not. I'm like, oh, I'm in Paris, guys. It's fab. And literally the whole time I'm like, oh, let's get some wine. And I was like, trucks blowing by, and like dust is blowing into my plate, and I'm like, everything's fine. We're in Paris. So it's gross. But it's what we got.
I know. I agree.
Mine was a totally different experience. That's hilarious. I went to a local place just like down the street that has a backyard. And so there were no trucks going by, but they did have, I would say, more than 6 feet between all the tables. But I sadly did not enjoy it because I just was so racked with guilt for the poor server. And on the one hand, like, of course, like they're happy to have a job and I tipped them exorbitantly and, you know, everything, but just it was like me, my partner, and like 2 other tables. We were all like eyeing each other of like, do we keep our mask on between sips or do we like let it hang down? If the server comes up, we were all like hurrying to put our mask back on. So it was just kind of this highly stressful situation. There was never a moment where you could just like, at least for me, I wish I had had the in Paris fantasy that Chris was having. For me, it was just like the constant negotiation of like wanting to like protect the server, protect myself, protect everyone around me, and then like side-eyeing like the new couple that came in towards the end of the night that was like flaying their like masks around like it was like a bra strap or something. I don't know. So it was. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. Basically.
Carlos, all of your posts are like, you're such a like an urban observer, and so like your posts are so really awesome at kind of like pointing out all of these like, you know, juxtapositions of our city life. And I think one of the posts you one of the images you posted was like of people outdoors dining, right, al fresco, and then like right next to them was like a dumped mattress.
Yeah, so like
charming. Yeah,
that was like at the beginning of the month. And of course, like I went out to photograph because it's just kind of like, you know, there's so many people moving out of the city, and that's when like buildings will dump their remodel trash. So it's just like, it's so intense. And that there's like several people dining by like piles of trash and mattresses and like toilets and stuff. It was like, cool.
Well, I had a similar experience to Elizabeth. I mean, in general, when I walk around and see people eating outside, I kind of look at them in horror, like, what are you doing? This is absolutely bonkers, right? But then I was in a situation where I went out with a couple of friends, and it was during one of the downpours that happened recently. And fortunately, we were under awning, but there were these 2 women sitting next to us who were in the rain. And basically the waiting staff came out and gave them umbrellas, and they proceeded to eat and drink with an umbrella. And they had a dog that was just sitting there in the pouring rain. And they were like trying so hard to maintain a sense of like being normal that they became the show basically entirely. Everyone was just watching them, and like, yeah, it's I mean, I felt such shame being there, but I tried.
I don't feel any, I mean, there's sometimes I'll feel a little judgment, but then I'm like, I go to the beach almost every Friday. And that feels also kind of like a huge, you know, it's like, I want to live a little bit, you know, I want to feel alive. I want to feel the sun on my buns, and I want to just like do something. Yeah, exactly. Semi-regular. So I get it. Totally. I just think it's like visually so amazing to see all of these things everywhere that are like new. That was my question.
Specifically, I think of the especially in relationship to these times, there's that video of people having brunch outside, and then down the street is the Black Lives Matter march.
Oh yeah.
Drinking, like being like, everything's fine, we're in Paris, and then like marchers going by, and I was like, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
Where we're at right now.
I imagine there's a big contrast between dining out in Manhattan versus dining out in Brooklyn as well.
Oh yeah.
Like it was really clear. It was like all neighbors, like when I was there. But even still, we were all looking at each other, you know, like. Rachel, you were gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, this is just like being in the salon.
It is, with an audience.
Like with an audience, like we're just all over the place. That's what the salons became, the discussions that were just all over the place. But I love that. I love that question, Carlos. It's a good one. Who would like to go next?
I can go. My question was kind of, now that I think about it, it's kind of maybe too general, but on the flip side, maybe that's okay. My question was very broadly, if there was one specific change that you would like to see in the art world after COVID, aka when there's a vaccine, what would that be that would stick? And I don't know how I feel about the question because I don't know how I answer that question, but I do think specifics are important. Like if it could just be one thing, could it be like more X? Yeah, that's my question for the artist.
I'll go. I'm just going to say what first came to my mind, which is that I hope that commercial spaces will now have a greater appreciation for experiences and more ephemeral work, and maybe not just things that are, you know, easily kind of just like, oh, there it is, goodbye. Because I feel like that's what we're all craving and missing right now, is not just the experience of an opening, but just experience in general, and how witnessing something that's temporal or short-lived can really be just as powerful as, you know, a still object. It's not fully formed, but that was just my first thought, is that I hope commercial galleries in particular start to kind of think about programming that is not necessarily object-based.
Great answer.
Yeah, I guess that was literally my question, Chris. So it's like, it's great. So I don't necessarily have to ask, but I think I've been following all kinds of accounts, including Change the Museum, showing the board members, you know, all those accounts, being very obsessed by just like reading and sort of like knowing more and slowly seeing the changes. So I guess I would like to see that keep happening. For example, the resign or the exposed stories and the support. Of course, that is also where I guess I wanted to ask that question as well. Maybe like in terms of like the complexity of it, like where do we stand, or how, what are the steps so we can make it further. But I guess like that's what I would like to see. Yeah, things like that, which I think was pretty powerful already. And like even accounts like that on social media has already made a lot of changes, moves already. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be in a DIY world possibly for a while. And, you know, for those of us who have been living in that world, that sounds, you know, a little exhausting, but I think it's also like really, there's so much possibility within it to kind of build a future that we want to see, that we've been already building. And so to me, that's like a really exciting possibility, even though it means, you know, like continuing the labor that we've been doing, maybe without the kind of support that we'll need, but there might be opportunity within this space, I hope. That's what I'm trying to think about it as, though, silver linings, you know. Yeah. But I agree with Xiang too. It's been really amazing to see the activity online. People are ready for it. They want it. They want that change, and they want that action from artists. So I feel like, you know, thinking about kind of like what happens after direct actions like protests or like continued protests, and I think that we return to our fields and see like where's the work, where can we plug in, like what can we do, and I think that's like a really important thing to be happening right now and to be focused on. So that's also something that I think I've been thinking about a lot.
Thanks for the question, Chris.
Well, you know, I just would like to say that I wish and I hope that, you know, some of this becomes a little bit more actionable than just, you know, talk, because, you know, historically speaking here. But I will stop there. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, that's true.
That's totally true.
You know, talk.
No, I agree. I would like to see this kind of be an ongoing process, and to see the art, the professional art world in general, actually step up a little bit more to interrogate their own complicity in these systems. Yeah, and I think that oftentimes it's going to be artists and staff who kind of hold upper leadership accountable. And I think that that might be what will be the biggest challenge really going forward.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because normally it's the upper leadership that lacks that sort of like really deep diversity that can actually help inform the implicit biases that are there.
Yeah.
There's no one to guide them.
Yeah. It's true. Elizabeth or Xiang, your question was asked by Christopher, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can re-ask again, but like, change the direction a little bit.
No, it's okay. You get a pass. You get a pass.
How convenient for Xiang.
Wow.
No, it's okay. No. I like to
Wow.
ask. No, I can, make it out of...
I'm totally teasing.
Little trick.
No, my question actually, I think, kind of bridges from what we were just talking about, which is that I was thinking, in thinking of a question, I kind of looked back at like all of our conversations that we've had to see if there was any sort of through line, because it feels like when we first started in April, even though we were in a pandemic, it was still a very different world than the world we're in now. Just with how so much has happened in such a short amount of time. And I felt like the topic of labor was something that has been a through line, either from like a particular topic of conversation like UBI when Carlos was leading universal basic income, or even from like the very beginning and kind of what we were just talking about with even dining out, like workers and who has the choice to work safely and who has the choice to work at all, and who is like forced to work, and what are these like tough negotiations. And then even thinking about labor more abstractly in terms of like having to say Black Lives Matter and having to explain that. And so it just feels like just the thought of like work and labor in all its different facets and forms is something we've been kind of dancing around these last few months. And so I guess like I'm curious to hear about y'all that, how has your thinking changed either personally or within your practice and your work about your relationship to work and labor, and then even thinking about like the phases of reopening. I think we said it in our very, very first meeting that we are non-essential, that we are like phase 20. And so like, what does it mean for us to be like, non-essential workers, like while simultaneously I feel like our voices and our actions like do matter so much. And so yeah, it's kind of a huge meandering question, but that's where my brain was at, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's funny. I think at the beginning of all this, that the conversation of labor, like I think especially a lot in relationship to a lot of my work, kind of spiritual and mental labor of like you were mentioning, to like tell people Black Lives Matter, or to I was like screaming from my soapbox being like, artists and freelancers are gonna get this shit, no one cares. And everyone's like, yeah, it's fine, let's go to Florida. And I'm like, no, don't go to Florida. I think that, and then I remember mentioning to you guys, one of my friends, Caroline Lazard, is disabled, and she's a member of the disability community, and she was saying like that now the world is having to reckon with health and the basic health and the idea of health and security and how you can move throughout the world and thinking about that. And she's like, with all that said, it's nice that, it's nice that we get to have this moment to like, if you can, to kind of reset and sit with those thoughts, but also at the same time, not everyone is getting to sit and rest at the same capacity. I think for me personally though, I definitely have not figured that out. I haven't like figured out the answer, but I definitely have given myself more of a, it's okay to sit down. Because in the flip side, I want to be optimistic, but capitalism is going to do what capitalism does. And when things return, I'm going to probably get the shit end of the stick or be exhausted, or as artists or freelancers and budgets go down and, you know, women are still paid this rate and the people of color paid that rate. And they're like, we have $5. Do you want to be in the MoMA or not? And I'm like, all right, let's do this. So I've been definitely telling myself that it's okay to sit and breathe and be present. And so for this residency specifically, like I spent a lot of time, I did a lot of workshopping with material, but I like talked to my mom like for at least a couple hours once a week. And I talked, you know, I just catched up with her, but then I asked her one question about Jamaica. So it's like that with previous work, I sat down with her for hours. So it's like, it's been many conversations and realizing that that's work. That is a part of my practice. It's also just like talking to my mom and she's like, I miss you. And I'm like, great. She's like, what'd you eat for dinner? I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. It's also been like, no, tell me about Jamaica. Realizing that that is work and it's okay to be present and know that when it comes out on the other end, I won't have time for any of that. So it's okay. Yeah, just personally.
I guess for me, the in terms of labor, not if it's about like personal labor in terms of like art making, I feel for me there wasn't any like actually a huge change, because I used to like this headset I'm having right now. Like I've been working in the headset. I've been working virtually or with computer for years, so that's been my mode of working. Whereas, but I do think, I think labor becomes so, in general, becomes so noticeable from like all the readings we had, and also like the reading I proposed when they talk about sort of like community was always based on the idea of who is immunized, who is demonized, and these words are always connected. So the one who are, you know, demonized or who's not immunized are the people who are doing more physical labor, and then their physical appearance becomes so noticeable right now, or a few weeks ago at least. So like I feel like the labor that is before it was more invisible becomes so apparent now, because they occupy a space that was seen as demonized, which is out of your home, which is not a safe space. So I feel like that somehow like that got exposed a lot, just like in general, I feel that. Speaking of labor.
Yeah, is anyone hiring? Because that unemployment is like about to run out. But in terms of labor, I think that, yeah, I have so many questions that, you know, as people's budgets kind of fall and peter out, it's like, what are we going to be offered now? I think like historically, it seems like our work as artists isn't really, it's valued on a different kind of scale of labor for some reason, even though it's, you know, specialized labor. You know, we're workers just like anyone else. We're culture workers, and we provide like so much for, you know, institutions and galleries and things that we're doing. And oftentimes we enter into these strange like negotiations that are set by precedent, pretty much, you know, percentages and things that you can't really argue with. And so I wonder if like that's one of the areas that we can hopefully like negotiate with going forward, as a kind of like, you know, within our like communities, you know, and that takes like advocacy from people that are within the institution, but also kind of like realizing that we are laborers and we are workers, and kind of not taking that. I mean, I would have a hard time also turning down that $5 MoMA budget, but maybe now's the time, you know, because yeah, when, if not now, when? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm there with y'all. Like, also trying to, on the one hand, be really forgiving with myself, kind of like what Chris was describing of, this is like the least productive I've ever been. Sorry to admit that to the residency.
No, I'm the same. I'm the same.
You know, but on the other hand, like some real shit has gone down. So if I am not productive right now. If anything, hopefully that's a good sign that I'm, paying attention and being aware. And then on the other hand, also thinking about, what you and Xiang have said, you being Carlos, that, budgets are probably, and Chris said it too, that budgets are probably collapsing, and we don't know what, 2020 is whatever money was budgeted for 2020 might still be there, but then 2021, what are those budgets going to look like? And so and now I'm realizing maybe my answer to Chris was sort of also an answer into what kind of work any of us can afford to make would be, I don't know if I could afford to make really big, beautiful prints or things like that. I might only be able to, make videos or something more ephemeral and things like that. So
make videos. No,
right. I don't have an answer either, but I felt like that was something that's kind of been on my mind, both from the perspective of I teach at Parsons. Am I going to be able to teach in the fall? Am I not? All of that just happened the last few weeks with ICE and the students, to budgets of, the things that keep us afloat as artists and everything in between. So yeah, it's a lot of unknowns ahead of us, unfortunately.
I think Carlos and Elizabeth, you bring up some really, really good points. And prior to COVID, I felt that perhaps in New York City, the smaller nonprofits were starting to do a little bit better in terms of wages. And of course, I think we have wage working artists for a greater economy, in large part to thank for that. And so basically they kind of created a structure so that each organization, dependent on their operating budget, could provide a fair wage based on what they made. And now, of course, with the general economy crashing and the arts economy also being, disproportionately affected, I can see this being a huge setback and in the end, of course, that is going to be, have a large impact on artists. And back to Carlos's point, I think it is going to be an interesting moment where can we say no to certain things? I'm noticing this in my independent curatorial practice, the budgets that I'm being given to work with, they're not very good. And so I'm feeling, even myself as a curator inviting artists to participate, incredibly uncomfortable even offering what I have to offer, but that's all I have to offer. And yes, is this the time when people just start saying no? Because I do think that is sadly the political moment that we're at, especially in the United States, especially in relationship to capitalism. Is that our only power at this point as individuals in a capitalist society, to not buy a product because we are making a statement against the corporation or the company, boycotting or saying no and using our actual body and labor to kind of disrupt the machine? Is that all that is left? I'm wondering if that is the most impactful action that we can take at this time. That's just a question within a question, but it's something that we have been talking about a lot, and that I think a lot of people are thinking about right now.
Also, that this conversation reminds me of, I'm not sure if it was our last salon or the one before that, but we talked about, the people most vulnerable in economies like this, like sex workers, and that we found an article that had that community within a certain city, raised funds to provide for the community, and how, again, it was indeed grassroots, that organizations and the people, taking care of each other even in relationship to the economic pandemic. So, I mean, I don't really know how that works in every situation, but I definitely am not waiting for a moment to fix any of this. So I think it's going to be always us on the ground who are fixing things for each other.
I think it's the hyper local. It's like the community is the immunity, like the Prashado article that we read, which I love, and I just keep returning to.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think we can look to MoMA for any sort of saving grace.
Should I also ask a question? Or?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I guess it would be kind of similar, but I think I wrote something here to prepare. Yeah, so at the start of the pandemic, because I was looking at all the sort of like debate between philosophers, like internationally, and one more noticeable one was between Zizek and Han Bingche, the like a Korean-born German philosopher. And their debate was like centered around like Zizek claimed, like centered around what should happen or what would happen after the pandemic. Zizek mentioned that the pandemic invites us to rethink the radical change of global capitalism and the reinvention of communism, whereas Han Bingche declares that Zizek is wrong because global capitalism will be restored vigorously soon after the crisis, and the virus will now give us to rethink the politics. And also like the state of emergency have always served as an excuse for the capitalist structure to be enhanced, right? So I actually relates that to like the art world, because we know that better. I guess like it's like when I look at institutions or galleries or museum, like if that's a sort of like a to link to their ideas, which is it seems like one way, like change the museum, we change the like a more communist way, like we change the structure, or we like we as people, we own the work, we own the collection, like that got redistributed more and more, or it will just like go back to say all the galleries move to East Hampton, like they just do their shit, like I guess like what are I want to like make it kind of open so everyone can join in and I guess talk about yeah, your sort of thoughts on that. Sorry, it's really open.
I don't know. I want to be an optimist. Does anyone have a pill so I can be an optimist?
Oh man, I'll take one too. Crush it up. I'll take it up.
We're a sharing economy, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh, I always fall back on, it's not a positive vibe thing. It's like people's kind of wholehearted rejection of Medicare for all, even in the midst of global health crisis. It is absolutely mind-boggling that our healthcare is tied to our unemployment employment, and unemployment rates are now at like historic levels. 17 million people are only the people are documented that have applied for unemployment insurance and received it. That is like the reinforcement of like a private for-profit healthcare system. It just like, I can't imagine that people are like turning towards a more social economy. It just like doesn't seem that way. But like within those things, outside of that, on a larger scale, at actions and at protests, we have seen like the kind of care on a scale that I've never seen before. Like people feeding each other, people giving each other masks, people giving each other hand sanitizer. Such like a beautiful, and present and caring, immediate present, that I just like have so much hope for the future after being in like, a crowd of, what was it, 15,000 people at the March for Black Trans Lives. That was just like, so beautiful that it was just unbelievable. And so like those kinds of moments where it's not, it's on a large scale, but it's not on the kind of like state-led scale. It's just kind of like people want it clearly, So that's what I keep kind of like, that's my safe space. That's my like loving space where I keep returning to those moments.
Yeah,
I think oh sorry. It feels so sweet and safe because it's so, I guess it's so rare, right? Like it never happens before. So it feels like very empowering. But I actually, at the same time, I wonder, like, for example, looking at, for example, Korea, how South Korea did the thing. Like, of course, it's based on tracking, but also at the same time, a lot on personal care. But their personal care took place not necessarily fully voluntarily, but also through governmental assignment, like to on a more ground level. So the personal care, the distribution of things are like from people to people, and people checking each other if they're doing a good job. I wonder if that kind of thing is what, like, I guess from a more rare moment, which now we feel love because it's all volunteer, to a sort of like more structural, or what do you guys, yeah.
I don't know. I've been having some really depressing conversations with my cousin in Central Florida who works at a gun shop. So I can't help but feel a little bit more pessimist about the future, because I worry that my cousin represents more people in this country than I do. So in terms of the organizing that you're talking about, Xiang, in terms of trusting your government, local, state level, federal, I think there's some deep mistrust, and I don't have an answer for how we get out of that.
Like to extend what Carlos was saying, I think I've been going to protests for Black Lives Matter for a very long time, and to see the growth and like structure and empathy, even in the midst of a health pandemic that is out in the streets, is really beautiful. Like from the hand sanitizers to the mask, but also like from the full knowledge, even as newcomers, that like white bodies in the face of the cops is a very much a real barrier for most cases, is a beautiful thing that like is like allyship really taking form in the actual space, or, you know, chants that actually like are so powerful, or the fact that the Black Trans Lives Matter protests actually even happen, when that has been kind of one chant that would happen and then kind of disappear, that there was one dedicated to that community. I'm pessimistic too about the government, but I do think that the longer this kind of like, and it will be, the longer this health and financial pandemic goes, and people are kind of just like, I don't have a job, ain't nothing to do, I'm worried about getting sick, or maybe I'm not worried about getting sick regardless of wherever I am, but I don't have a job, or the economy is not where it was. People are kind of forced to like deal with the reality of where we are, and that doesn't always mean we'll come together, but it does mean it pauses things. You know, capitalism can't function if you don't have nowhere to go, can't spend no money, don't got no money, you know. So I don't know. I mean, we can hope for that eventually the government's like, no one can spend money if they don't have money. No one can go spend money if they're gonna cough in the movie theater. So what do we want to do? Like, you know, there has to be a breaking point. And I think that kind of like the longer, I mean, I'm really not looking forward to it, but the inevitable spike 2 of New York City in this fall will set us back to phase 1 or 2, and it'll just be like, yeah, you know, we're in this for a minute, and what do we want to do as a state and as a nation to like make smart changes, even if it isn't drastic, liberal, crazy Bernie Sanders changes, you know? There has to be a middle ground. Yeah.
I also think that the movement, or the various movements, just cannot stop, because like they should not stop, right? And that as disheartening as this whole experience has been, there have been these crazy, surprising decisions that the Supreme Court has made just when we thought that an aspect of reproductive rights was over. All of a sudden they overturn something, or all of a sudden, you know, they are going to do something about the detention centers. And it just seems like it's been kind of schizophrenic, right? It kind of feels absolutely hopeless. Then we go out, we yell, we make noise, and then someone gets fired, right? So yes, this momentum has to, I think, be maintained. And it was the spike that made it happen, right? So if we're going to have another spike, it's just going to get louder and bigger. And I mean, this is in my lifetime the first time I've witnessed people's power actually engendering change, right? Sure, we've read about it, right? And my parents talk about the 60s all the time, and it's great to hear about, it's nice and romantic, but now we're seeing it. So we know that it can happen. It's not always happening. And it's not always going to happen according to our ideologies, but we're seeing it happen. And it's pretty somehow surprising and amazing.
I agree.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask Xiang a question about your work in algorithms and racial profiling. Have you noticed any changes, Xiang? Like, are they making different algorithms? Is there a response there in the online internet world that is also interrogating systemic racism in any way? Like, is the data changing that you're experiencing and collecting?
Yes, I think in general, even before all the movement, there was many changes happening already, as we shared during the previous salon, of like what got changed from 10 years ago. What like all the problems, either through search to facial recognition to basically just sort of biased data and so on. And but specifically recently, in terms of what the companies got changed after the movement, I'm not aware yet. But I guess something that is related to that is quite interesting. Is I guess like Twitter got hacked. You guys all see that, right? And I think that's a very sort of course, interesting, but at the same time really terrifies us, because I feel if hackers could hacking this, of course, steal the account, but then get more into the algorithm, like if they get Obama and Biden's account, now they're just like asking for a little bit of money, but how about if they just then sold it to somewhere else, right? Like easily. I guess these are done by maybe like really smart teenagers, but how about if it's someone that is way more strategic? So I do think the danger there, like the lack of security within all these platforms, is very terrifying. Yeah.
So should we open it up to questions from the guests?
Yeah.
Would anyone like to ask questions? Got so quiet.
Sorry, guys.
Maybe I have a question.
Hey, Lichelle.
Well, I don't know, but I'm more interested into like the process that you took. I don't want to say your name wrong, Xiang.
Yeah, Xiang.
The process that you took to create the work that you showed us. Was it completely digital, or, well, it seemed as though it was completely digital, but could you kind of like talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Thanks for the question. I guess long story short, I was really into this filter bubble phenomenon, which I guess become just so dominating dominating our everyday lives. We either like what the Twitter thing, which is said, like if they change the algorithm and use it better, like to target people, that will be really effective. And or for example, recently, the protest and how that was reported in, because I was born and grew up in China. I used to live in Italy for many years, so I was like looking at medias, how they report, for example, the protests in totally different ways, right? Like, but that was done by the algorithm because a lot of news were just filtered, I guess. Yeah, so that was a lot about that. So the process was a 3 months collecting on all different kind of media platforms that we all use every day, and with some keywords as initial inputs to start the algorithm, including words like censorship, surveillance, Asian experience, 5G, trade war, things I was interested in, but also kind of universal. So it's either to follow the hashtag of these keywords or type in these keywords on YouTube and then just let the algorithm run. So I end up being pushed a lot of like Fox News to watch. I watched like just like a lot of things. Of course, I was like interested in those topics, but at the same time, I won't necessarily choose a lot of those channels. So I was like trying to like after the whole collecting phase, I use all the collected data, textual information, imagery information, and train a chatbot whose knowledge sort of equals the knowledge of the archive, what I have collected. So it's kind of like a self-portrait in a way, but not necessarily. It's like what the self-portrait algorithm creates for me. And then through a conversation with this AI chatbot, we created a film script, and I made an animation based on that film script. So that was a sort of process, if that wasn't clear. Yeah.
No, it's good. Yeah. So it was essentially through a specific sort of program. Like what program did you use for that? If you don't mind, answering.
Yeah, of course.
I get into like like technological components. That's why I'm interested.
Yeah, of course. And that's a sort of like not a particular software, but like open source, because all the engineers, they develop something, they develop a way to train a chatbot, to train a Siri, and then all you need is to have a huge data set that you can train your own. So I use like an open source sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just sort of use my own collected data to train that. So it produce, for example, if you train them with Shakespeare's writing, it will just write as Shakespeare. So things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question that I wrote down earlier, so I'm going to read it. And I feel like, well, I'm just going to go for it. So one of the things that I think you all share is a sort of practice of archival storytelling. You all draw from an accumulation of source material, topography, interviews, oral histories, digital data, magazine archives, to name a few. Given the extent, especially in our current moment, how history is being unpacked and everything is being decolonized, and we are unlearning what we learned in school and are probably still in debt for, would you say that your artistic strategies defy notions of archives as fixed deposits of knowledge? I don't know if that makes sense.
Like, do you mean we are kind of working to dismantle the archive, or do you mean that we are kind of working within the confines of it, but like perturbing it in some way, or anything in between, or?
Definitely both. I mean, like you're remixing and you're reassembling information, but you're also kind of refuting this idea that there is an archive, right? Something that just is fixed, that knowledge is fixed.
I mean, that's like the foundation of my whole practice, basically. Yeah, I mean, at least for me, I'm, as I said right in the beginning, I'm interested in what are the processes that makes a piece of information become evidence or factual. And it happens to be in my current practice, in my current project, I'm really looking at the mechanics of that with fact checking and the history of fact checking and the inherent failure of fact checking from the beginning, that there is that even something that we do need in some way. I'm not saying we can't have fact checking, but something we do have to come to some sort of understanding that, like, coronavirus is real, like things like that. But on the other hand, we have to always kind of ask the question of, well, what facts are even being presented to be checked? Whose stories are being told, and then who is doing the checking? So, it's a both and situation for me in this current project. And then more broadly, I'm always interested in what becomes trustworthy, and language I used to use in a previous project was, I'm really interested in kind of the overlapping notions of fact and faith, and how much like belief systems come into play in how we experience what we believe to be truth and reality. So that's me.
It's so funny. I'm like, yeah, yeah, okay. I feel like a lot of similarities in my own work too. As much as I think in my most recent work, I'm using the just histories of like what has happened in this and on this island, or what was happening in terms of like renter's insurance for my mom to get a house when I was younger in Long Island for me to then be raised there, or what was going on in immigration law for my grandmother to come here, and all those logistical things. And then also like dates of like, when did my mom actually come to this country? When was I born, et cetera, et cetera. But also realizing that there's so much falsies in those facts, that I need to start some sort of framework from in terms of like also just like spiritual and emotional trauma, and how that impacts, and how that indeed can become a fact more so than the actual dates and times and places. And how,
totally.
Experience of those facts can skew the reality of what was happening at the time. Like, as maybe factually, the immigration law for Caribbean people come to this country was X, Y, and Z, but in reality, the way it was played out, or the immigration lawyer said this, or when they got to the country that happened, or my mom, there was a peeping Tom on her block, so she experienced the block in this POV, so it wasn't this, or small things that kind of like how spiritual and emotional experience kind of weigh just as heavily in terms of like dates and times, and trying to find that balance, but definitely I think recently lending myself to know that spiritual and kind of like these nuanced ideas of that are kind of weigh just as heavy, but I definitely need to strike the balance of the two to work the confines of both, but give both the importance they deserve, because definitely the weight of the history of my family story is definitely more as important as like what actually just physically happened. But there's indeed like in one of my pieces that I made that I'm kind of rethinking about is called Duppy, and Duppy means ghost in Jamaican, and how I've been thinking a lot about the idea that there are ghosts in the room that we're not talking about. And a ghost is, you can say, like a fiction. It's like actually there's actual bodies and weight in the room that we're not discussing, and how that's such a common thing with first generation to their ancestors, or that be their grandparents or their parents, that's in the room that's not being discussed, that's waiting, a simple dinner table conversation that no one's talking about because grandpa doesn't want to sit on this side of the table, or doesn't eat this, or mom's is weird around this date. And those things in the room, those specters, those are heavy and have a real presence, just as facts and dates do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I've been through so many opinions about this, but more recently, there's like such a weight that comes with considering institutions that write history. It's like we feel like this need to be a part of that history that's being written. And I think that's something that is like, becomes kind of important because it becomes like this document. And that's where I think like the role of artists is so important. Like Chris was saying, we are like processing oral histories. We're processing things that don't have kind of like stable citation practice, things that don't, can't be kind of like indexed and can't be kind of put into like a historical academic canon, but are so important. More recently, I've been thinking like really similarly, actually, Chris, about kind of how like an object can be not haunted, but can be haunting. Like an object can carry so much history with it, but really what is happening is that we as people are like carrying these objects with us into the future from the past because they have so much of the present wrapped up in them. They have so much kind of history and story within like an object. And so, you know, like a familial historical object becomes this conduit for like a story, you know, it becomes like a physical manifestation of something. And so like, that's so important to carry with us, but it's also so important to kind of, you know, think about when we're making work too, because I think we're kind of doing the same sort of work. We're like injecting histories into objects. We are like thinking about, you know, the visual and the, you know, these kind of histories that we're tackling and synthesizing them into these like objects that oftentimes, you know, don't have like this complete history, like readily apparent, but that like have them like within their essence. And I think that's like something that is so beautiful and so wonderful, and also cannot be kind of like, again, like put into like a citational practice. It cannot be like indexed in a way that is quantifiable by like academia or like anything, any sort of kind of, you know, written kind of record. And so like, yeah, it's such an interesting question. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess to continue, and also this our experience, the residency experience, and you guys works very much like inform like a project I'm going to make. Like now there's no, I guess, no urgency, but very much sort of like inspired by your guys' practice that I not long ago I found out like my dad was like I knew, but I figured out like he was like a bigger artist than I thought he was, and he was like written in the Chinese art history before, or like he has like participate like super important shows and so on. So I guess like to react to you know, either family history or so I started to think about, yeah, collecting some oral history and see, and also sort of like reflecting on. I remember when MoMA reopened last October, is that correct? They opened a new room dedicated to contemporary Chinese art, a very small room, but on the title it says, these defiant artworks marked a new sense of agency and international dialogue and challenged the Chinese government's censorship of cultural production, which actually, I guess only one piece had that, something to do with that, nothing else. All the other works has nothing to do with like the Chinese government's censorship or whatever, you know, but then that's how the first generation's art has been sort of described to the world. Like it's like a Western construct, right? So very much like, so I was like, oh, I wanted to look at my dad because he was a first generation and like learn more about what truly that is. So I guess, yeah, definitely very much become more skeptical.
And it's something interesting you said. It's like you knew it, but like now you like know it. It's like there's things about things we know, but do we like really know them? And I think even in your work, Elizabeth, it's like we know that these women were doing such important work, but like what do we really know outside of just like, oh yes, women were the first fact checkers, but like what do we know about that fact actually? And is that it? Like what is there to unpack about that? There's so much that fact needs to be like rethought about as a fact and what that means, like kind of like culturally, historically, like emotionally, like, and who made it a fact and who cited it and what book and who wrote that book and who's the publisher and are they biased? And you know, there's so much to unpack there.
And who and what organization isn't biased? I mean, that's an inescapable fact of humanity. I mean, you know, so to even, I mean, that's something that's like one of my favorite fun facts about Time Magazine was that they wanted to name themselves Facts, as if this was just anything they publish is like unequivocal. But then, you know, at least for me, that just seems like to only invite, you know, more questioning, that these founders had such hubris to say, oh no, we are giving you the facts, period, when there is no period.
I also look of like needing some sort of fact. We need facts to live. Like, how do I get coronavirus and how do I not do it? Right.
And Chris, I love what you brought up, and then what Carlos and Xiang expanded on was this idea of the haunting, and that's something with my previous work that was all based in the South that I have thought so much about, of like both the kind of the literal sense of like, you know, what are these things that we carry with us, but then also really in a deep, deep sense, you know, in terms of white supremacy and all these things, that this is a deep haunting, and I don't know what we can smudge to like completely rid ourselves of it. It's going to take so much time and shifting of not just bodies as generations go by, but minds. And it's so much work to extract these things that we have carried with us as a society for so long.
It's interesting to think of history. We're talking a lot about objects, but and imbuing these objects with this knowledge or new information. But it's also interesting to think about history itself as the kind of ongoing haunting, right? It's like that history is always going to be there, and depending on how it's unearthed or when it's unearthed and when it rises to the surface and when it starts to really manifest itself so strongly that we start to take it seriously. I'm really interested in that kind of haunting, like that kind of like pervasive haunting that hasn't manifested itself yet into something that is tangible, right? And how that somehow there seems to be a process of care that is keeping that living, right? And usually that is through storytelling or oral histories. But I definitely feel like this country is haunted in that way and will be haunted for a very, very long time by this history that has just been so deeply ugly and constructed and manipulated into something that it is at its root just a pure symbol, and that's something that I'm very encouraged by in our current moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the extent to which those kind of ghosts are making themselves very known and present,
and also like being the like awkwardness of sitting with discomfort and living with discomfort. I mean, there's, you know, it's you. I think that, I think I even had issues around using the word duck because I think it'd be like too like, ooh, ghost, and like, ooh, like bad juju in the room. But it's like the idea of a ghost is also an ancestor or someone who's passed. It doesn't have to always be spooky. And I don't, and haunting, the idea of haunting is, you know, ooh, Halloween, but haunting is also necessary because it keeps you present to know, if you know where you've been, you can know where you are and then what is in the room that isn't there, to keep you present of like what we don't want to go back to or what we do want to repeat, etc. And that can be in terms of family stories, that can be in terms of like what grandpa did that no one wants to talk about, that can be so many different things, mistakes we've made as individuals. But yeah, it's that uncomfortable space. I think in terms of my work, and I can't stress enough, Elizabeth, when you said like your work doesn't have to be a spa moment. And I was like, really? So I was like, I don't want to be like the trauma porn, like everything is sad, slavery got us all. Like fucking homophobes. Like it's okay that to sit in that discomfort, acknowledge it and respect it. Because otherwise we, you know, are like, everything's fine. We're in Paris. We're in Paris. We're eating baguettes in Paris on Fifth Avenue, and this truck's going by. It's fine. And that's like not a fact.
Yeah, I feel as like practitioners, or like when we think, even like we're constantly in between, like, oh, are we going back, or are we sort of like stick to the current time or moving forward? So like our practice, I feel like we're all like kind of in between. Like we continue to do what we used to do, but of course at the same time, every day, every single moment being affected. So it's like a very hybrid sort of. So I'm very excited to see, because that's how I feel very strongly too. Like I like kind of like doing what I focused, but very much like just inputting everything we discussed, everything we observed, as like a very hybrid thing, which I guess, I don't know if it's going to be a successful like artwork, but I feel like very, yeah, like I guess, yeah, react to what Chris said a little bit. Yeah.
I actually have a question for my fellow artists. Like, what, and you don't have to answer this because this is kind of, what are you doing for the show?
Oh, God.
What are you gonna make, girl?
It's gonna be ephemeral.
Yeah, I'm really counting on our curator in residence to guide the way.
Well, those meetings are scheduled for next Tuesday.
I'm the only one.
Yeah, keep that date fluid.
But we can totally go there now if you'd like. I want to be mindful of time. I mean, there are some people here who I can't see. I can't see their faces, but I was going to say that if we can kind of like just morph into a drinky conversation, if anyone would like to take a second to go to their fridge. Oh, Carlos. If anyone would like to stick around and just hang out and talk, I'm happy to start talking about the exhibition if you'd like. So how about you, Lijel? You want to join us?
Sure. I need to take just give me a minute.
Okay, everyone, okay. Let's take a second for bio break or to go get a drink from the fridge or fix a tea. I'm going to put on turn my camera off for a moment and just go grab a drinky. I'll be right back.
I was really hoping you were going to say you're going to put on a party dress or something.
Yeah, this is as party as I'm going to get right now, but find something. I'll find something near the fridge, whatever's near the fridge. I'll be right back.